Hello, I'm Alan Capper, South South News. In September, the United Nations will be holding a major conference on aging around the world. It would appear that we are being given the benefit of extended lives in many countries around the world. Those lives cut short by age-related illnesses. I'm very pleased that we have with us today Dr. Brian Kennedy from the Buck Institute for Age Research, studying aging and the illnesses that affect it. Dr. Kennedy, it's very good to have you with us. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's great to hear that the United Nations is putting so much emphasis on this.
Well, I hope very much that you and your organization will be part of it.
Well, we'd love to.
Tell me about the Institute. It is, we don't use the word unique very often, but it is in many ways a unique research organization, isn't it? What is its mission?
Yeah, it really is. The research has been going for 12 years, and it's really based on a unique concept, and that's that if we really care about chronic diseases, that we should be focusing on the causes of those diseases. And we believe that one of the major causes of many of the diseases that are affecting people around the world is aging itself. Aging increases the risk for a whole range of different diseases. And so our mission is to really understand what causes aging, understand how that contributes to disease, and then do something about it to make people have healthier, longer lives.
But this is because we degenerate as we get older. Isn't that a natural process?
Well, I believe it is natural in the sense that it happens to everyone and almost all animals as well. That doesn't mean you can't slow it down, and if you learn about the process and the mechanisms that drive aging, then you can figure out ways to intervene, much as you would in the context of a disease, to treat the disease or to slow the progression of the disease. It's just that we want to target aging instead of the diseases, and we think that by doing that we'll get a benefit against all of the diseases.
And what are the major diseases that really affect or curtail having an extended life?
Yeah, I mean, the chronic diseases that have really grown over the last century, and this has happened because we've done a good job of treating most infectious diseases and things like that, particularly in the developed world and increasingly in the developing world. And so what we're seeing now is the causes of mortality or cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegeneration, diabetes. Those are long-term chronic diseases that eventually lead to people's deaths, and those are the major killers in developed countries, but they're increasingly causes of mortality in developing countries as well. If you look at the top causes of mortality in Africa, for instance, cardiovascular disease, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, those are right in the top 5, and those are all diseases of aging.
I think we are living through a time where life expectancy has grown quite dramatically in the northern countries anyway, the more prosperous countries. I think the average in the United States is now 79, so that's is that happening in the developing countries as well?
It's happening, but at a slower pace, and there's about a 20-year gap between life expectancy in the developed countries and the developing countries, and I think that better sanitation, better treatment for infectious disease will increase life expectancies in the developing countries so that they begin to approach what's happening in the developed world. But as that happens, the emphasis on chronic disease is going to be more and more apparent, and it's going to be more necessary to think about aging everywhere. So we think it's time now to consider aging, not just in the developed world where aging occurs slowly, but in the developing world where we think that some aspects of aging are occurring at a faster rate, and there's even more reason to think about it. And
how significant is nutrition in both the developed world and the developing world?
Well, it's really critical. I think that for the research that's gone on so far has indicated that genetics is a component of lifespan. So in other words, whatever genes you get and what particular types of those genes are influence how long you live. But it also indicates that environment is a big factor. So how you live your life, what you're exposed to, and nutrition is a big part of that. So diet has a major impact on the diseases of aging and aging itself. And I think that one of the things that's happened, and this has happened in the developed world, is that as food became cheap, much of the food that the cheapest food you buy, is junk food. It has high fructose corn syrup in it. It has very simple carbohydrates in it, and these are not particularly healthy. And so what we're finding is, it used to be that when the wealthy are the only ones that had access to lots of high quality food, that they suffered the diseases of overnutrition. But now what we're seeing in much of the world is that as there's more access to cheap food, which is bad food, high carbohydrate food, that things like diabetes are emerging as a world problem, and obesity
in the developing world as well.
It's happening at a slower pace, but it's increasing in the developing world. And in the United States, for the first time in recorded history, life expectancy is either steady or beginning to go down. And one reason for that is obesity, the obesity epidemic. Most data suggest that if you're classified as obese, that has about an 8-year shortening of your life expectancy.
Right.
And so nutrition has a huge impact on aging. And in all of the animal models we work on, by controlling the type of food the animals eat, you can dramatically extend their lifespan.
Now, you've just come back from Africa, haven't you? From Madagascar, I know?
Yeah, we had a nice trip down there for a conference surrounding breast cancer. And it allowed me to think a lot more about what's going on in the context of aging in Africa. And again, as I said before, many of the leading killers are the same diseases we're thinking about in the United States. And so we're looking at partnering with places in the developing world to get the message out about aging and how aging contributes to disease, and work with people to try to think of strategies that might mitigate aging, because that's increasingly, as I said, becoming a problem.
Indeed. Were there any kind of revelations or any things you discovered while you were there that you were not aware of before?
Well, one of the things we got to do is to interact with the Akbarli Foundation, which is really trying to bring therapeutic approaches, better awareness about breast cancer and cervical cancer to women in Madagascar. And I think that's a great organization, and one that we're looking to partner with, because we have information about the research, and what we'd like to do is translate that information into things that happen in the real world. And this is by interacting with foundations that are doing things at ground level, we can begin to have that effect.
Right. Now, research is a very expensive thing, and I think we know that. So you presumably need funding for your research, which is, it's a very big research institute that you have there. How big is the faculty?
It is. We have 18 faculty. We have about 200 employees, and the research we do is very expensive. People think that working on mice is not an expensive proposition. Well, it is. My mouse cage costs alone are $25,000 a month, and that's just for my lab. So this is a big expenditure.
That's amazing.
And we've been very good in the past at getting money from the National Institute of Health, and that accounts for more than half of our budget. But the funding crisis in the United States right now is dramatically impacting the NIH. And so the money is increasingly not there from the government to support this research. It's impacting everyone around the country, all the universities and foundations like ours.
But you're depending on philanthropy.
Yeah,
and
so we have to reach out in other ways to try to raise this money to do research.
You raised the mice for your research.
Yeah.
You found some very interesting things about longevity in mice, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah. One of the pathways that I've worked on for a long time, and other labs as well, is this pathway called the TOR kinase pathway. This is a protein in the cell that responds to the nutrients, so it fits into this dietary issues we were talking about. And we found that by turning down this protein's activity, it has similar effects to changing the diet, and it allows animals to live longer. And the exciting piece of data that was published recently by the National Institute of Aging Intervention Testing Program was that they could take a drug that inhibits this protein, give it to mice that are 20 months old, so that's the equivalent of a 65-year-old human, and those mice live 15% longer. And perhaps more importantly, they have a longer health span. They are disease-free and functional and running around the cage for 15% longer too. So it's not only extending lifespan, but it's preventing the onset of these diseases. And that's exciting. And I don't know if this drug is what's going to work for humans or not, but the mere fact that we can start to find compounds that will extend lifespan in a mammal. I mean, a mouse isn't that different from us when you think about it from a biological perspective. Suggests to me that this is going to be something that's a feasible approach to extend health span in humans. And if we find 20 drugs that do that in mice, I'm going to bet that some of them are going to work in humans as well.
The various diseases that affect aging, that come into play during aging, which of those are you the most optimistic about in terms of having some research breakthrough? After cancer, billions of dollars has gone on cancer. There have been some successes, but where do you think we are now?
Yeah, I think the most success has been on cardiovascular disease. It's gone from a killer to a manageable disease. It's still, we can't cure all the symptoms of cardiovascular disease, but when people have heart blockages or arteries that get blocked, it's now very feasible to go and take care of that problem, and people live decades longer and in a functional state. So that's been a real success story. Cancer's been more limited. People certainly live longer with cancer now after they get diagnosed. There are a few cancers that can be effectively cured now, but it's a hard problem, and it's one that despite the billions of dollars of money, it hasn't resulted in what I think we all hoped. And this is something that a point that I would like to make, that we declared war on cancer 35 years ago.
Yes.
And now there's a big pitch to declare war on Alzheimer's disease. And that's understandable because Alzheimer's disease is increasing in prevalence in the population. And
you said around the world as well.
And around the world. But it may be the same problem, that when you get to that stage, when you get to the point where you have Alzheimer's, you've already lost a lot of the neurons that are important, and it's hard to make them come back. It's very hard to treat at that stage. And what we believe is maybe we ought to declare war on aging, because if we could intervene while you're still healthy, we think it's going to be easier to keep you healthy than it is to correct something that's gone wrong after you get into a chronic disease state. And I think that's really the message that we would like to get out. And that's the research that we're doing at the Buck Institute, and is increasing in other places as well, is that if we focus on preventative medicine, doing things while you're healthy to keep you healthy longer, that I think it'll be more successful. And if it is, it'll keep people in a chronically healthy state as opposed to a chronically diseased state. And I think that's something that everyone can hope for.
Well, Dr. Brian Kennedy, Chief Executive Officer of the Buck Institute for Age Research. It's been fascinating talking to you. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again, particularly linked with the UN conference in September. So thank you very much for being with us.
It's been great, and I'll come back anytime. Thanks.
Thank you. Alan Kappa, South South News.